Do you actually believe Reading getting the Premier League? Unreal. And that season was unreal.
And that, of course, was the day Murty scored as well. Perfect ending.
Took out Kingsley, wasn't he? Like, Kingsley was goading him. Yeah.
Just to let you know, by the way, Carl, in case you're wondering, Kingsley is our mascot lion. So if you want to imagine, so Murty scores this amazing goal, runs across the fans as a hero, then you see him take out this giant cuddly lion. And I mean, he takes him out.
Stephen Hunt actually missed him and landed on the runway, didn't he? He kind of went over the top because he was so excited. He just actually jumped over the top of it.
Hello and welcome to When Football Began Again, the podcast that tries to remember the times when we weren't just staying together with the Premier League for the sake of the kids. My name is Carl Jones, I am your host, and today's show is a countdown of the all-time Premier League table. We are up to 43rd, and that is Reading Football Club. My guests were absolutely marvellous. The amount that we had to cover in this show was so much that, thanks to a few tech issues as well, we recorded for close to 3 hours. In the end, I decided the only way to cut this down was to release it in 2 parts. So this is part 1. We cover Reading's history as a football club. We also get to their first spell in the Premier League, those 2 seasons that were quite different in how they turned out. We cover all of that in today's show. Then on the next show, part 2, we cover their second spell in the Premier League and also put a Burundian player in the Premier League Hall of Fame before play your apps right. And it's in that second episode where there is quite a considerable chunk dedicated to the difficulties that Reading FC have found themselves in, to say the least. Dai Yong, at the time of releasing this, is still the owner of Reading Football Club, despite some movement towards him potentially selling up. We recorded this a couple of months ago, back in March, where things really were looking very, very bleak. And I think that comes across in both episodes, but especially the second episode that I'll be releasing soon. So if you are new to the show, particularly I guess if you're a Reading fan and you found this through that, please hit subscribe. Make sure that you follow the show so you don't miss episode 2. But there is lots and lots of fantastic episodes in the back catalogue. The Blackpool episode in particular, this reminded me of another football club that have really had their fans put through the ringer by, let's face it, absolutely abysmal ownership. So this is the first section. It's probably a little bit more upbeat than the second section, although we do play some fun games in the next episode as well. My guests, Sam Michael of Comedians Talking Football podcast and the stand-up comedian himself, and also Johnny Hunt, a cult hero on the Reading FC terraces, a very passionate man, does some amazing things with the fan base, with the Royals fan base. We talk about that quite a bit as well. So let's crack on with it. I mean, basically, if you are new here, please do hit subscribe, leave a review if you enjoy the show, and don't forget that part 2 will be coming very, very shortly after this. But let's crack on with it now. My chat with Johnny and Sam, all about Reading Football Club, 43rd in our all-time Premier League table. Enjoy. Today's show is a continuation of our count up the all-time Premier League table. We're up to 43rd, and today's show is all about Reading FC. I have 2 Royal superfans with me, both making their debuts on the show. It's absolutely fantastic to have them both. Sam, Johnny, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Pleasure.
Thank you, mate.
Let's start with you, Sam. How long have you been a Reading fan? What was your first game?
I go back to when I was I think I was 10 years old. I liked football when I was younger. I watched a lot of the Premier League, but I never quite got behind a team. And then one day, for some reason, I don't know why, my dad tells the story better. I was about 10 years old, and I just said to my dad, "Dad, I think I want to support Reading." Yeah. So he took me to the next game that was on, which was a lovely cheap game. I believe it was FA Cup first round proper against Grays Athletic, which I think we won 1-0. And I think that was in the year, it was either 99, 2000, 2000 to 2001 season. And I enjoyed it. And we went to a couple of more games and I was getting into it. And then came the playoff semi-final against Wigan, 2001. Yeah, Division 2 semi-final playoff, which it still to me is the greatest football game I've ever seen in my life. it's still the greatest moment ever supporting a football team. It was absolutely incredible. I still believe that's the loudest the Madejski has ever been that night when that second goal went in. Unbelievable.
Johnny nodding away there as well about that match, and I think there's especially something really special when you're that sort of age that when a football match implants itself in your memory. Johnny, same question to you. Tell me about your first game and what the Royals mean to you.
First game was Bournemouth away. I think it was about 1981. My dad took me, I think it was a cup game. I think we lost 1-0. I was living down that part of the world. I was brought up in Reading, but my dad used to go out drinking with Robin Friday back in the 70s and came home with his sock one night, which probably sums up Friday as a person. A different era of football. I never unfortunately got to see Robin Friday play, but anyone that knows Reading is Robin Friday was a legend. But yeah, I was born there and it's my home, it's my town, it means the world to me. And that Wigan game I remember so well because I was living up in Cambridgeshire. I came down for it, and like Reading do, which is probably a theme for this, we lost the playoff final with the goal off Rouge's bum. I think that was who's actually my dog's named after Rougier, so that's kind of where my life was at that time. But it's memories. It's fun. And obviously, I'm a bit older than you youngsters during the war, but yeah, it's memories and like those games, individual games that you've watched as a fan, of a club like Reading means the world to us. You can't ever take those memories away.
And well, and you're also wearing one of those memories, I believe. For anyone that's watching on YouTube, give us a background on the shirt you're wearing.
So this is the shirt from the promotion season, the 106 point season. Actually hasn't been washed since the QPR game where I've got the signatures that are still on there. Just glad we're not in person doing this because you probably asked me to leave. My family have asked me to leave many times, so it's up in the cupboard. But like that this shirt is iconic for me. It's I came over from Australia for the game. I was living in Australia at the time.
Wow.
And got to I was watching the games over there, and as you do when I actually had a shrine to Reading when I was living over there in my apartment, a signed match ball, but they couldn't send it over to Australia, so I ended up getting a signed shirt, which I still got. The sad things that you do as a Reading fan are just like it's actually quite it is comedy without being funny, but we do it. But yeah, like that day to me was I met Mertz and I got to wear his medal, and as a fan for years, to actually believe Reading getting in the Premier League was unreal, and that season was unreal.
And that, of course, was the day Murty scored as well as the last outfield player to score. In the first team, everyone had scored except Murty. Then we got the penalty, and it was just written for it. It was like a script. It was the perfect ending. So yeah, it was just.
And took out Kingsley, wasn't he? Like Kingsley smashed him. He said that Kingsley was goading him that he hasn't scored. So he asked for it. Kingsley got all he deserved at the end of the day. But it was that just was summed up the season for us, I think, as fans. For a little old club like Reading to be up with the big boys. Yeah. Just
to let you know, by the way, Carl, in case you're wondering, you might know this or you might not. Kingsley is our mascot lion. So if you want to imagine, like, Murty scores this amazing goal, runs across the fans as a hero. Then you see him take out this giant cuddly lion, and I mean, he takes him out. And if I remember right, didn't James Harper get a couple of kicks in as well?
Yeah, and I think Stephen Hunt actually missed him and landed on the runway, didn't he? He kind of went over the top because he was so excited. He just actually jumped over the top of it. Nowadays, you're probably put in jail for 5 years because it's not politically correct to abuse a mascot. But at the time, it was a end to a fun season. We talk about the Premier League, but that season where we only lost 2 games, or we lost the first game of the season, then we lost to Luton about 30 games in, but we were unreal. It was an unreal team that didn't cost much money. Leroy Lita cost $1 million. John Madejski, I think, is still choking about how much he actually spent for him. But it was a team that was made from top to bottom as a club, as managers, as backroom staff and players that just gelled.
The passion, obviously, that you both speak about that team, and we are going to actually cover a little bit about that team, but an all-time legendary team. And I think also one of those teams as well that kind of penetrates the subconscious of the neutral fan. That 106 record is remembered by fans who aren't Reading fans. And I think, obviously, that's the thing when you get a record-breaking team and a team that sets those records, as Reading did. Well, in 43rd place, as I've mentioned, in the all-time Premier League table, having spent 3 seasons across 2 different spells of the 32 Premier League era, it's Reading. Football didn't begin in 1992, though, as we well know. And while these 3 seasons do remain Reading's only top-flight campaigns in their history, there is a wider all-time top-flight table they also proudly sit on as well. Now, there have been 65 teams in the history of English football that have been in the top flight. If we take that from the beginning of the all-time First Division table, obviously Reading's 3 seasons in the Premier League, any guess where they might be on those 65 teams?
Oh, Jesus.
I mean, let's be honest. We're talking about a team here who half the people who listen to your podcast, Carl, when they saw there was a Reading episode, I guarantee 90% of them all went, "Oh yeah,
that lot's fallen apart in League One. Yeah,
I thought that was QPR."
Yeah.
Any guesses?
60?
60? Are you going
57.
higher or lower? That 57. You're actually closest, Johnny. 56th of the
Oh.
65 teams in the all-time top flight table. So there are 9 teams below you in that all-time table. You're above Oxford United on goal difference. I thought that one would go down well.
Are we above the fake hoops? QPR.
No. I unfortunately I
I'm
do know
gone.
that
I
without
can't do this
checking.
anymore.
We're just behind Bradford Park Avenue and Accrington FC, but 56. There we go, and 43rd on the Premier League table. So before we get to that Premier League era, let's have a potted history lesson on a pre-top flight Reading FC. Formed on Christmas Day, 1871, they first joined the Football League in 1920, just after the recommencement of football following the First World War. After playing at various locations in the area, a switch to professionalism in the back end of the Victorian era saw them move to the purpose-built Elm Park in 1896, where they would spend the next century and a bit up until 1998. Johnny, let's come to you. What are your memories of Elm Park?
It probably haven't changed since they first built it, to be honest. It's the greatest ground. But like Reading, we now had to shoot ourselves in the foot because the season that we were going to move to our new wonderful stadium, we got relegated from Elm Park and in the league, whatever it was, championship now. But that summed Reading up at the time. But Elm Park was one of those grounds. Just the atmosphere was just tin roof, rain, doesn't matter. The noise was great. What you were stood in, you didn't want to know from the toilet areas. They had the Royal Rendezvous for beers and the fun. But it was a special ground because the atmosphere was just immense, especially, the good seasons that we had, 86, the record-breaking Royals to the McGee season, and then the season where we didn't quite just make it in the playoff final. Again, hint, there's a pattern. But it was immense, and even after that, it was old school football. I think they actually had evacuated the stand one day. I think because of a fire risk, because it's wooden, and obviously then joking aside, what happened with Bradford and all the stuff, it was a stadium that wasn't fit. I'd love to have seen out in the Premier League. I mean, you got Luton, Kenilworth Road now. There's not much difference, to be honest.
So in 1991, businessman John Madejski takes over Reading in what will be the beginning of a golden period for the club. The man who'd made millions launching Auto Trader magazine and was once rumoured to have had a romance with Cilla Black would eventually lead the Royals into the top flight in 2006 for the first time in the super stadium he built in his own name. He did come pretty close over a decade before that, though. Taking Reading over in the 3rd tier, they're quickly promoted as champions in 1994 before finishing runners-up to Middlesbrough in their first season back in Division 1. It's a position that would have been enough for promotion pretty much every other season, but had it not been for the reduction of the Premiership from 22 teams to 20, meaning they had to settle for the playoffs. They would lose 4-3 to Bolton Wanderers after extra time at Wembley, and again they led 2-0 at one stage. It would take more than a decade for them to get that chance again, as 3 seasons have struggled to follow that heartbreak, culminating in relegation back to the 3rd tier. Sam, John Madejski clearly supercharged the ambitions of a club that has spent much of his existence up to this point in the lower divisions. He very nearly got Reading into the big time within just a few years of taking over. Let's allow ourselves to fantasise just for a moment. How different might the future of Reading have looked had the top 2 gone up that season and Elm Park had hosted the superstars of the 90s?
Well, it's interesting that you did get a slight taste of it, and I have very faint memories of this with the FA Cup game against Manchester United, where we had the likes of Cantona playing at Elm Park. And that, in a weird way, was my first introduction to Reading, because it was on telly, there was John Motson, and there was this big media thing about it, not just because Man United, Eric Cantona, Reading, small club versus big club, but because Uri Geller was involved at this point. Now,
Okay.
you've got to remember, we talk about the backroom staff and the history of the club. Uri Geller at one point was brought in as a spiritual advisor at Reading FC.
I'll
never forget. Yeah, that's it. I'll never forget that John Motson line. Well, he's very good at bending spoons, but what about cup ties? I'll always remember that. I'll always remember that. And in fact, there's a great documentary. You can find it on YouTube all about Uri Geller's time at Reading. It's the funniest thing ever. It should be up there, you know, with like the Graham Taylor documentary. And Motson is so proud of that line. He repeats it 5 times during the day. He says it to each person he meets. There's also a fantastic bit where they're blatantly filming Uri Geller at different times of the day. So they're leaving on the way to the match. And he goes, and I'm saying now, I say to you, the game will end 5-0 to Reading. The game doesn't end 5-0 to Reading. It ends 1-1. And it very quickly cuts in him blatantly later in the day going, actually, I changed my mind. My prediction is 1-1. And then the game's 1-1. And he's like, well, I told you. So there was that. And I think, you know, we all sort of talk about Kenilworth Road now and everything there. I honestly don't think it would have been as big a deal as people may have thought back then. I do think they would have had to have done something with that kind of bank that was there, which was kind of a way for just all stood. But ultimately, I assume that money would have gone into to change that. I always sort of wonder about that because it would have changed the history of Reading forever. So many of these positive memories that we're going to be talking about today wouldn't exist. I don't know how we would have fared in the Premier League back then. There's no way of knowing. We don't know how much we would have spent, who we would have bought in, how we would have survived, who knows? So it could have been a case of that would have been our one season in the Premier League, never again. One thing I do know is that John Madejski's and correct me if I'm wrong, Johnny, but his plan was always to get Reading into the Premier League and then look for a quick sale, essentially. It was kind of, that was his job. That was the end game. I know he wanted to build a stadium. That was certainly there. But I don't know how long he maybe would have lasted had we gone into the Premier League back then. So we might have had different owners come in. It would have changed everything. Would have been a completely different course of direction had we gone up.
The best thing though that season, the rumor that I heard, we signed Boris Mihailov, who was the Bulgarian national goalkeeper, Wiggy as we called him because he had a bit of syrup. And apparently he signed for us because he saw us playing at Wembley and he thought that was our home ground. then he went to Elm Park and it was like, one of the memories I think going back to, we've talked about previously was, back to the 83 when the Thames Valley Royals was going to happen with Robert Maxwell. That was a big moment in Reading's history, which we've had, recently with the protests and stuff. That could have been a game changer, having to, share a change with the unwashed people of Oxford. I mean, it was just, but it was close. It was only, certain people made a stand, and that could have been a big game changer back in the day, for the club. So, so John was a legend.
Well, I was going to say with Madejski, that's the tragedy. Really, is that, I'm sure we'll talk about the owner and everything coming forward, but half for me as a fan, for us the fans, but half for him because that guy invested his life into the team, into the club, and he's financially worse off because of the club. He would die a richer man if he'd never really had much involvement with Reading FC, and the amount of money he put into it, the amount of money he had to come back and put into it after everything went wrong. He was sold a lie when we had the Russian owners come in, and that was really, I really felt he was manipulated into that sale. We were told that this new owner's coming in. He went to university. It ended up being the son of an oligarch. It was actually oligarch's money, and son of an oligarch, but. He owned Victoria's Secrets. He had this glamorous model wife who was going to sort of come in. It was all modern, and he'd been to university at Reading. He'd gone to Elm Park. He was just sold this sob story. They completely manipulated him. And then the sale was made. We go up to the Premier League, and he's leaving thinking, great, what a perfect ending to a perfect run. And then everything that's happened since. I'm very lucky that a couple of times I've bumped into Sir John Madejski at the game, even if I've just seen him from a distance. Always want him to always give him a wave, always give him a shout, because I want him to know how much he's loved.
that's a bit of a potted history of the first 125 years or so of Reading FC covered. Let's move a century or so forward and start in 2002, 2003. Reading have been in their fancy new stadium for 5 years, but remain in the third tier before Alan Pardew leads them into the first division and then into the playoff finals the following year before leaving for West Ham. He's replaced by Steve Coppell, who continues the good work, keeping Reading in the promotion hunt for the next couple of seasons before eventually leading them to a record-breaking 106 points and automatic promotion as champions to the top flight for the first time in their history back in 2006. Johnny, we've covered it a little bit already. That team, I would imagine, is legendary. What is so special about them to you as a Reading fan?
You can't put it in words. Again, I'm not picking up with them. We spoke to Steve Coppell on a podcast, and he's just such a grounded, lovely guy. You can see why the team worked, but it wasn't just Steve. It was Brian McDermott, who was, the head of the scouting. We had Nicky Hammond, recruitment. We had John Fern, who was physio. We had one of the nicest, best people ever in football, Eamon Dolan, bless him, he's passed, who set up our academy and made it what it was. It was, you speak to all these guys and anyone that's played under that system, it was just a special time. And Brian, they had this setup that was just, it was the Reading way, as we called it with John, Sir John. It was just this, how things were done. And they did the homework on players. Steve, they went over and saw Kevin Doyle play over here in Ireland. He didn't do anything. And then, Doyle scored a screamer and then we signed him. Transfer fees, Doyle and Long, I think it was 80 grand they paid for the both of them, which is just insane because Doyle was just, and Shane, a bit younger, but he still did his job that season. But there was just a plan, and Steve is so relaxed and did what he did. He didn't have to say much, but everyone knew what they had to do as a team member. And you had Mertz as the captain, who he struggled when he first signed for Reading at Elm Park. He was injured for a long time, and when he got fit, got Nicky Shorey from Leyton Orient Reserves. That team was worth about $1.5 million in total. I think probably, I could be wrong. Marcus Hanneman came in for from Fulham, Sonko, Sidders, Harps. It was a culture. It's building a culture of a team that gelled, that worked together. And you had, Dave Kitson, who, come through from Olsey to Cambridge to Reading. These guys were hungry. They were all hungry to prove themselves. And then you had guys that were calm. Glenn Little was just the most slowest winger I've ever seen in football, but he was brilliant. And then you had Bobby Convey on the other side. But what it was a culture as a team. And from all the guys that we've spoken to, and it's not about plugging the podcast, but if you want to listen to, you can listen. But you listen to these guys talk, and you go, wow. And it was that culture. It was a mindset where Steve, Brian, all of them there was no ego. They were all just in it together, and they worked for each other. They believed in each other. The effort and they played good football. And when you've probably got the best two central midfielders that Reading have had in Harps and Sids dominating it, and it was unreal. And then I think Steve said himself was if you've got Leroy, Dave Kitson, Kevin Doyle, Shane Long, and you're having to juggle them, well, he didn't have to, because injuries meant that they literally just kind of all only had two to pick from for most of the season because one got injured. So it's kind of like a dream kind of a squad. And that's probably where the next season, when, the limelight hit Reading and different things, which we'll talk about, it didn't go as well because, when you're unknown, and that mindset that we had as a team was brilliant. It's the best ever team I've seen for Reading.
I was just going to add that that's such an important point you made there, Johnny, about the backroom staff. Famously, Steve Coppell, we've just talked about some amazing time signing Steve Coppell made. Steve Coppell has always gone on record to say his greatest signing of all time was Brian McDermott, getting him in on the, the backroom staff. And I feel that is the big mistake we made when Coppell left, was to get in Brendan Rodgers and basically wipe out the backroom staff. That was why it went wrong for Rodgers. I do feel that, Rodgers needed a bit more time because we'd seen the biggest shift ever. The squad didn't necessarily change that drastically, but it was the backroom staff that we'd known and, we'd come to love and had worked with all those players for the best part of 6-7 years was just suddenly all gone. And Brendan Rodgers had his new way of doing things. It was a very modern way, and eventually that way did work for Swansea, did work at Liverpool for
he had a big watch as well, didn't he? Massive watch.
Yeah, the big old watch. But yeah, so he comes in, and it's just that was the worst thing we did when Coppell left. There should have been a suitable replacement to come in, work with that same squad, and carry on that same, as we call it, Reading way. There's a reason why the successful replacement after Steve Coppell was, of course, Brian McDermott, who was part of that initial setup, recreated that setup essentially. He knew what worked at Reading. He knew the family way that this club was going to work. He set it all up again, and away we went.
From that championship winning team, the additions of record signing Leroy Lita, unknown talent from Ireland in Shane Long and Kevin Doyle, alongside free signing Stephen Hunt, came in to complement established players like Marcus Hanneman, Nicky Shorey, Steve Sidwell, Dave Kitson, to lift Reading into the top flight for the very first time in their history. I think in that next transfer window, I mean, Sam, teams do normally rip it up a little bit, add lots of signings to strengthen coming up, with the exception of Solky Hyun from Wolves, Sam Sodji from Brentford, Michael Dewberry on a free transfer. Steve Coppell is sticking with his trusted squad. I mean, I imagine that's something as a Reading fan you felt confident in, having just seen the greatest team in your club's history get 106 points. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I was almost shocked that we were written off right before the season even started. It was we were completely written off. I think we were seen as there were quite a few aged players in there. And don't be wrong, I had some worry. I mean, you got to remember this was a time when we went, the Premier League was changing into the modern game that we know it today. We were seeing, when I grew up in the 90s, you had players like Razor Ruddock, like Tony Adams. Your everyman was playing football, and our squad looked like a bunch of everymen. Glenn Little, we mentioned earlier, sort of guy you'd see down the pub. In fact, you probably would see him down the pub. And same with Stephen Hunt. You had Stephen and all that, and they were
John Oster. John Oster was a fringe.
They were sort of the guys you would, they just felt like normal bloke, which is you don't get that much in football now anymore. You feel like you see people of your community playing football, and this was the time in the Premier League you had the likes of Ronaldo playing, and some real world class players in the Premier League, and there was a little bit of anxiety about it, but I just felt that there was just something unstoppable. There was just some magic in that squad that just meant they get the job done. And I just remember the glee of, I didn't go to the first game of the season, I was working. And I remember everyone where I was working that day was saying, well, I'm glad you enjoyed the Championship. The Premier League's a completely different kettle of fish. And, before we do it, we're 2-0 down to Gareth Southgate, whatever happened to him. Gareth Southgate's Middlesbrough. We're down to it was his first ever managerial game, I believe, for Gareth Southgate. We're 2-0 down, and everyone at my work's going, there you go, see, it's not all easy. Anyway, I still kept the faith. I know that squad is capable of doing amazing things. They've done it all season before. One thing they never did was give up. I think even top teams now, you could be a Man City fan, go 2-0 down, and you still think, oh, that's it. That's us in real trouble. But somehow that day, we're 2-0 down to Middlesbrough. It's coming into the break, and I'm thinking, we're going to win this. We're definitely going to win this. And as soon as, things just started playing into part, we knew Kitson was going to come on. We knew this was going to happen. We go on and we win 3-2. And it was absolutely fantastic. And there's just a few times that season we just managed to turn things around by using that same skill, that same mindset that we've had in the Championship to win games.
Reading do win that first game of the season, a thrilling 3-2 victory over Middlesbrough, where they come from 2-0 down. It's the beginning of a very solid start to life in the Premier League, with wins over Man City, Spurs, West Ham and Bolton in that first half of the season. Johnny, by the end of 2006, you're in 9th. You're as close to the European places as you are to the drop zone. Were you surprised at how well the team adapted?
To a point, yeah, but then we smashed West Ham. I think it was like New Year's Day, beat them 6-0. And I think that went, wow, that was like the belief in that team. So I'm saying, like, that first game, if we lost that first game after being 2-0 down, it could have been a different thing. But Steve Coppell, the team, had that belief in themselves. They got that win. And, we the only team I think we really were outclassed by all season was Arsenal. Arsenal was just a different beast. We couldn't ever get hold of Arsenal. We battled with Chelsea. We took out 2 goalkeepers and we drew 1-1, joking aside with the Stephen Hunt thing, which is, everyone still talks about now. But, like, we were competitive. And, as a Reading fan, it was like, Jesus, we're in their faces, and we're not fazed by playing Chelsea, Liverpool. We didn't maybe win every game, but like we're competing with these teams, and you look at them and you're going like, yeah, they're going out there and they're not scared. And that was the huge thing that Steve set up with that team. They believed that they were all like, as I said earlier, like free transfers and cheap deals, and they're playing against Ronaldos and Rooney's and whatever else. But they're like, here, bring it on. And I don't think we were ever in that season, apart from Arsenal. I think we lost 4-0. We were ever embarrassed by any team. We were in the games all of the time, and we showed that we could actually compete. We beat teams by teams, and Sidwell was probably, I think, the big link in that team that we missed the second season, because you can't replace Steve Sidwell in that Reading team, because him and Harps were good. We lost that, and we had guys like Glenn Little, Bobby Convey didn't really probably do it as much in the Premier League as they did in the Championship. They had injuries and whatever else, but we found a way. Stephen Hunt came in and played as a winger, and we still. I think Dave Kitson got sent off, I think 30 seconds into the next season against United. But like it was just fun to watch, because it's like it's little old Reading annoying the crap out of all these fucking superstar football teams that think they're like, we're competing with you and we're not scared of you. No, they were never ever frightened by playing those teams.
No, and I just liked how, you're right there. We really did wind up teams, and we really held our own. I think the real turning point was when we really held our own against Man United in that one draw. You had Rooney, you had Ronaldo. We held our own really in that 1-1 draw, and it was what was great is, and I hate to go back, and I don't mean this any offense to any of the players back then, but they really did look like your average blokes. And not only that, you see how the way footballers look now, skin tight and all that stuff. Look at you can't quite see it, the image behind us if you're watching this on YouTube. No doubt you had to Google image some of the Reading squad from back then. They look like they've just got out of bed after them. And again, I'm not trying to have a go at them, but I mean, they would just come out with shirts that were too big for them, shorts that were too short, shorts that were too long. And again, no disrespect to the wonderful kit manager we had back then. He loved a good dance with Harper back then. Yeah, but we just was this real, just sort of like, yeah, we're here. We're not playing your fancy thing. We're here to win, and we'll do it any way we can. And it was just absolutely fantastic. It was great fun.
2007 gets off to a great start with a 6-0 win over relegation-haunted West Ham, as we mentioned. It's going to get even better in those opening months. A run of 5 wins in 6 means Coppell's men reach the magic 40 points with 12 games to spare in a period where they rise as high as 6th. By mid-February, they're just 3 points behind 4th-placed Arsenal. It is a high water mark that's followed by a bit of a wobble, but Reading finished the season in 8th place on 55 points, narrowly missing out on European qualification by a point behind Sam Allardyce's Bolton. I mean, Johnny, that is an incredible first season in the top flight. It very nearly does end in European football. Going into that second season, again, are you confident that the team is going to push on? Obviously, we know how that second season is going to end, but what were your memories of that, of kind of finishing in 8th place and thinking, what's next season hold?
On the day, I remember, because I was listening. I was living in Australia at the time. And I was listening to the game, and like we could have probably won that game. And I think at the time Ipswich had been in Europe and they struggled the next season. And we were like going, well, if we go into Europe, is that a bad thing? Because we haven't got a big squad. So if we don't, we just want to be a mid-table Premier League team, to be honest. From where we come from. And then, Sidwell left, which I think, for me personally as a fan, you couldn't replace Steve Sidwell in that team, because he was the engine alongside Harper. But he wanted to go. He wanted to go to Chelsea. He wanted to go, and that's fine. Fair play to him. Sure, he could be called up to England.
That was Mourinho's Chelsea at the time.
Yeah, and I think, from, the secret footballer that may have played for Reading, with ginger hair, possibly, that heads were turned. I think, and I think you've come through Reading's team, and you're a bunch of licorice all sorts, and that's no disrespect to all our players, because they've come from different backgrounds and they've done what they did to win the Championship the way they did, to then go to the Premier League the way they did, to get to where they were. Second season syndrome always is going to kick in. And you know, players are getting a bit older. Players, you know, we lost Sol Keon. He didn't last. I don't know what happened, why he wanted to leave. And so we got MS Faye. I don't think we had the options that, you know, we really could have built on the team that we had financially wise. But that's Sir John. You know, it's the Premier League then is not the Premier League now, where you know you can throw thousands of millions at it, whatever you want to do. It was a different world, and Sir John was trying to keep it controlled. You know, you have to ask one of the players or the managers or whatever about that. But we had still a competitive squad, and we were still, you know, in the mix for that whole season. Where when I was looking at, you know, my Premier League 11, the first season Leroy was on fire. The second season Dave Kitson was on fire because of injuries and whatever else, and we lost a lot of momentum in that squad. And we kind of the 3-1 win over Liverpool at home was pretty enjoyable, but a lot of bad results. That, you know, we lost to West Ham, and you're like, yeah, we're in trouble. They'd find a way to get results still, but then I sat there watching I think it was Portsmouth Fulham game, and I'm not saying Harry Redknapp had any cash in a brown pocket. That was a hard one. That was a hard one to take, because I think, you know, we were better than that, and we just really didn't. We just run out of steam. And you know, Steve Coppell was doing what he could with the squad, you know. And then there was then all of a sudden there was uproar. I remember Sonko didn't want to play in the game. All of a sudden we're starting to get into the negativity about the team, which I've never heard for years before. They didn't want to play in a reserve game.
Yeah.
If anyone else wants to listen and says I'm wrong, but I do remember that. And there was another player that didn't want to play as well. I think it was Faye. Mercy Faye didn't want to play in the reserve game, and there was an issue around that.
So his attitude stank. I mean, Immerse Faye, if you are real, I still struggle to know if you even exist. But I mean, his attitude stank. He just didn't fit in with that squad. It did. He was. There's loads that came out about him. You know, he
I think
was
he's a coach now. Wasn't he just when the
he was the wrong fit, and unfortunately,
he's just won AFCON with Ivory Coast.
I
did not realise that.
Yeah.
I didn't realise that. No, I didn't think I still don't think he exists.
Obviously, that loss of Steve Sidwell to Chelsea, it's a huge blow. I mean, in that second season, you bring in Khalifa Cisse, Liam Rosenior, Emma Faye, as we mentioned, who's just won AFCON. He's still only 40, by the way. He's still only 40 years of age as well, Sam. So there you go. But again, who knows?
And Sam was still
he could come back and redeem himself.
There's still a chance. A promising start to the second season with a point at Old Trafford, despite being down to 10 men for the final period of the game, is followed by a 2 home defeat to Chelsea in what is a very difficult start by anyone's standards. There was a 1-0 win over Everton in the opening weeks as well, but signs of struggle ahead are apparent when the Royals find themselves in the early season drop zone, something that was completely unfamiliar to them in their previous season. Then comes one of the Premier League's most remarkable matches of all time on a trip to Fratton Park. Sam, what happened that day? Summarise for us as Johnny covers his head.
I'll tell you what, I just got to uni back then, and I remember one of my first mates at uni, still a good friend of mine, is a Leicester fan. And when we met, I think we were just talking about our expectations for our teams. And I said, I'd like us to get it into Europe this season, ideally, following how we nearly missed out last season. And he, being a Leicester fan, said, well, I'd just quite like us to sit mid-table in the Championship. And I laughed in his face at that. And needless to say, he had the last laugh as a Leicester fan. But yeah, so it was a weird day. I remember getting the text updates from my dad and being like, well, he's on a wind-up. This is a wind-up. This isn't the results. I'm getting these stupid results come through. It's an odd game. Like, I'd say to anybody, go and watch the highlights. I remember it for a few reasons. One of the rare times we ever wore our beautiful black and silver kit. And it's just, the goals are strange. Like, there's just a lot of mucking around. It feels like, and it looks like at times, so there are some great goals in it, but there are also some goals that look like they're kids playing in a park. It's kind of like a terrible kind of clearance results in a long shot and all this sort of stuff. And it's just one of those things, again, which happened with Reading that season, is that we would kind of get back into a game that was lost. But ultimately, we could have lost that game maybe 3-0, but we couldn't just do the easy way. We had to go and lose it 7-4. Same with the Tottenham game. We couldn't just lose that 2-0. We had to go all the way. They score, we score, they score. We're back in it. We're not in it. And that's what really, I think, did us in that season, was that we would fight really hard and get nothing out of it. It was really frustrating. Like, I remember another game that season was Man City, where we got a really good draw that turned into a loss in like the 94th minute. And that was one of James Harper's wonder goals that season. If you ever get a chance, go look James Harper's goals, 2007, 2008 season. They're incredible. And it was just, we were scoring these great goals. And, you know, we had Kitson who was on fire, and we just were not getting, all we were doing was dropping down the table. And that must just get into the player's head at some point, that you put in all that effort, you keep going to the final whistle, and all you get at the end of it is a loss. And I don't know what happened that day. I don't think anyone understands it. It's kind of more remembered now for just sort of Chris Kamara having a breakdown. But it was just mad. It just summarized the season for me, that game. And it's the fact that, you know, we should be talking about the 6-4 game in that season, but we don't. We talk about the 7-4. It was just bizarre. And yeah, that's it really. It was a strange season. It was night and day to the season before, for many reasons. And yeah, it's just one of them. It just was one of them things I've never quite got over, is that season. It just feels still unfair. Like Johnny said, we were better than that. We were better than some of the games we were playing in. And at the end of the day, we went down on like goal difference. You just see these games where we beat Middlesbrough 1-0. We were all over them. We should have smashed them 3-4-0. Why didn't we? It's just, it's frustrating. It's frustrating to look back on. And that game in particular just sums it up.
Yeah, that 7-4 defeat won't be the last of Reading's away day woes this season, while home wins against Liverpool and Newcastle, among others, keep their head above the drop in a tightly packed bottom half. 2007 does end with that 6-4 defeat at Spurs, and that is actually the start of an 8-game losing streak that finally ends in March, with James Harper's injury time winner against Middlesbrough securing their first 3 points on the road of the year. It's followed by home wins against Man City and Birmingham, but by final day, Coppell's men find themselves visiting a dreadful derby needing snookers. Only a win and Fulham dropping points at Fratton Park would keep them up. A 4-0 win for Reading looked to be enough for much of that afternoon, but Danny Murphy's 76th minute winner for Roy Hodgson's Fulham would keep the Cottagers up. Johnny, it's heartbreak at the end. That 8-game losing streak really did it for the Royals. Was there ever any unrest with the fans? Like, you know, like were the fans always backing Coppell because he got so much in the bank? Or was there ever that kind of, often sometimes you see a team changes the manager 8 games from the end. Was that ever like even thought about?
I think it's a different era, to be honest, mate. I think, you know, who else is going to do a better job than Coppell at Reading at that time? It's not Coppell, it was the players. There was issues. I still say now, like, it's about, you know, they've got the watches, they've got the cars, they've got the money. Now, you know, you've come from little, you know, it's like David Brent in the office, and now all of a sudden you've gone, you know, to the Oscars for the players. All of a sudden these guys that were playing and they were hungry and they were fighting for the team, all of a sudden it's like, well, actually it's about me now. And if anyone wants to argue maybe as a player, but Nicky Shorey was one that did that. And I think, you know, momentum in football, any sport, happens, and that was the way it was. It just, we didn't have Steve Sidwell. Sidders was that benchmark as a team player in central midfield. We tried to replace him with MSC Faye, whatever, you know, Khalifa Cisse. It wasn't the same. It's never going to be the same. You know, and if you as a player you lose one of your best teammates. Harps was one of, you know, his engine was brilliant, but you lose Sids alongside you that, you know, it's almost like telepathic as a player. You know what each other's going to do, and they did for years and years and years and years. But when one's gone, and like it's like, well, what are you going to do? And that shown that season. We were still competitive, but 8-game streak is not good. Like, yeah, and then got down to the last day, and, you know, as I said, like Danny Murphy hurt. It really did hurt so much that's how close we got. That's football. Yeah. It hurts. You know, I was watching about 4 o'clock in the morning in Australia. Fulham and Pompey. It was like a friendly game. Let's be honest. They weren't. Once they got the goal, it's like, yeah, I'll see you out in the back of the stand. How much? It's hard to watch as a Reading fan. You know, we went down. We all wanted Steve Coppell to stay because we believed in him so much. as a coach. And there was, that season was probably the worst out of the three for me as a fan, because we should have gone back up with the depth that we had and the squad that we had. And it just tailed off at the end, which for reasons I'll never know. That was the hardest part, because everyone goes down, everyone goes up. That's football.
Your question about Coppell and the fans' faith in him. It was always we wanted Coppell to stay. It was a huge movement, like campaign after we got relegated, asking him to stay. Looking back, I don't think he wanted to. I do feel that the season after that Johnny talked about a little bit, he was a bit burnt out. I think it's almost like trying to try and recapture the magic of the last time we were in the championship. And that's a hard thing to do. And I think we sort of saw it in two minds. And I think part of us just sort of saw this as a blip. Like, we didn't mean to go down. We went down on goal difference. We're good enough to be in the Premier League. We'll just get through this season and go back up. It almost felt that, especially when things start going well the following season. It's kind of like, well, this is fine. We'll just go back up. It's not an issue. We keep the players, blah, blah, blah. We carry on. We pretend this never happened. We continue being a Premier League team. But you might call that arrogance, but there was genuinely the belief we had from Steve Coppell. We knew what a good manager he was. At the same time, you've got to remember, he was being, pipped for the England job. People forget that back then. After everything that happened with McLaren, his name was up there, and deservedly from the years he'd had in management. But sorry, going back to the question, for me personally, I look at that latter part of the Premier League season 07-08, our second season in the Premier League, and I do just question some of the decisions. I wonder why Leroy Lita wasn't playing more. I felt like he deserved a place in that team. I felt we were playing Shane Long too much. Don't be wrong, I love Shane Long. He is a Reading legend, but I didn't think he was good enough to be starting games at that point. And he was being played on the right wing as well. We had this sort of strange sort of gap on the right wing back then, and he was kind of filling it in. And there was just this strange kind of wind down to that season where we just didn't look good enough. We were just a team who were going to lose games, and it was a difficult pill to swallow. Like you said, we couldn't do things the easy way either and just lose our games and go. We had that last push against Man City and Middlesbrough. I think where it really felt like, and I think some of us had sort of thought things were over, was the Fulham game, where we lost to Roy Hodgson's Fulham.
And they were on an insane run, weren't they, Sam? They went on a mad run to stay up. Like, we would have stayed up if they hadn't have done that. I don't know what the stats were, but it was mad, wasn't it?
And
they beat Man City. They did whatever they did to get out.
It was insane, and it's their great escape. They remember it, and you look at the success they had following them staying up, and before you knew it, they're in Europa League final. So you sort of think what would happen that day had Fulham gone down and we stayed up. It could have changed the history of football yet again. But it was difficult, and like going back to that final game of the season against Derby, and again, like Johnny said, it was a different time. You didn't have social media back then, really, taking up the scores. I'll never forget when Leroy Lita scored that goal. That kind of went to celebrate, and then saw the fans' faces and was like, okay, this doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, that kind of agony on a final day when everybody's almost attention is in a game that's happening quite a few miles away.
Speaking of a few miles away, I think Johnny was saying you were watching that game in Australia at the time where you were living. So I was at uni at the time, and I was working in a sports bar that day, and they had the games on, and it was Man United won on the last game of the season. And I was the only Reading fan in there, bar one very depressed looking bloke. And there were Chelsea fans in there, there were Man United fans in there, and there was nothing more depressing than hearing about my team go down and just seeing a load of Southern Man United fans going, yeah, Man United! Oh yeah, my granddad went to the toilet once at a service station in Manchester, so I'm part of it. And it's like, and it was just, that has changed, to be honest. I'd love to see them now, but just seeing them all celebrate this team miles away, and then there was me, and I was on the bar, and all day I had people going, oh, cheer up, mate, might never happen. And the guy I was working behind the bar with was a Man City fan before Man City were Man City. And he did quite a funny thing. He, after they won the title, turned all the telly off, turned it onto Songs of Praise because he didn't want to see them lift the title. And all these Man United fans were getting really leery. And I remember him saying, Sir, you've had your game of football as advertised. We now have Songs of Praise on now, if you wish to stay and watch that. If you want to see them lift the title, you'll have to go elsewhere. And all these Man United fans just left. It was brilliant.
That's banter when you are in charge of the TV remote and your opposition's is winning the league.
So that was Johnny and Sam. An abrupt ending there. I do apologise. Part 2 will follow very, very shortly. Please do hit subscribe, follow the show for part 2, where we cover in much, much more detail the reign of Dai Young, the second spell in the Premier League, kind of where the lads see Reading going and what they would be happy with over the next few years, what would represent success. We also put a Reading FC 11 into the archives as well. As always, thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for leaving reviews. All of these things are really, really helpful. We were back in the charts again last week after my episode with Jack Campbell. Lovely response I got to that show as well. So thank you very much. We are now nearing the end of the series. There is part 2 of the Reading episode coming soon. I then have a Manchester United themed episode all about the treble winning season that will be coming in a couple of weeks time. We will end this series with 98-99 as well in our season by season. So as we approach 25 years, a little bit Manchester United heavy, I appreciate, although chronologically not much we can do about that. To be perfectly honest with you, they do dominate, but there is plenty in it for non-Manchester United fans as well. I can assure you of that. So all the links you need for today's show, including our social media, is in the description for this show. You can also buy me a beer on there, should you so wish. Just helps towards the production and the various costs involved in releasing the show. If you really enjoy the show, I'd really appreciate you doing that. That would be fantastic. But as ever, please keep on sharing the show. Leave us a review. Take a couple of minutes to leave a review. It would really, really help me find new listeners. But that's it for today's show. Part 2 of Reading is coming very, very soon. This episode was a little bit late out, so I do apologise. It won't be quite as long a wait for part 2. Do hit subscribe so that you don't miss that episode. But until then, I will see you soon. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. See you soon.